We are following major breaking news tonight. Singer David has been arrested in connection to the murder of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas, according to the LAPD. This is a case that stretches back more than 2 years to when she was last seen alive. Her decomposed body found in the trunk of David's Tesla late last year.
We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, let's get to this breaking news coming in right now from Los Angeles. A bombshell announcement by the LAPD. I want you to take a look right here. This is the post that was put out by the public information officer with the Los Angeles Police Department on social media announcing the singer, known as David, had been arrested by homicide detectives in LA, quote, for the murder of Celeste Rivas. Now, David, his real name is David Burke. He is now being held without bond. And he hasn't been charged as of yet. The LAPD says that his case will be presented to the DA on Monday for filing consideration. We're going to go over the process here in just a moment. This is a case that has taken months to get to this point. I know so many of you have been following this, and now it seems like the next step, a major step, is still something that's going to take some time before we learn a lot of information about this case. And we'll be talking to former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani about that here in just a moment. But as we focus now on this announcement, it may feel like a long time coming because David was announced as a suspect in November of 2025. Now, before we get into what will happen next, I do want to get you up to speed on this case because it is one that has been going on in some ways months, in other ways years. According to the LAPD, this all started in September of 2025. And that is when officers responded to an impounded lot in Hollywood after there were reports of a foul odor coming from a vehicle, a Tesla. Now that vehicle, it had been towed days earlier after it was found on a street, abandoned, it seemed, in Los Angeles. Now police say that vehicle, that Tesla, it was registered to David Burke. And many people in the music community know him by just one name, David, D4VD. Now, when detectives searched that car, they found a body, and that body was later identified as a 14-year-old girl, her name, Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Her body was in the front storage area of the Tesla. That's like the trunk of the vehicle, and it was in a state of decomposition, law enforcement said. Investigators have said that Celeste may have been dead for weeks before she was discovered. The teen's mom told investigators that she was last seen and heard from in April of 2024. So here we are in April of 2026 with David now under arrest in connection to her murder. The last time she was seen alive, according to her mom, all the way back roughly 2 years ago. Her mom also added another point about her daughter, and it was that she had a boyfriend named David. Now, by late 2025, sources were telling ABC News that David was being considered a suspect in the case, but no charges had been filed. Yet behind the scenes, a grand jury had been hearing evidence in the case, including Burke's reported travel to the Santa Barbara area of California during the spring of 2025 and a search of the Hollywood Hills property where he was reportedly staying and reports of a high heat burn cage found at that location. Then we go to January of this year, 2026. David's alleged close friend, a man named Neo Langston, was arrested in Montana for failing to appear as a witness in a Los Angeles grand jury investigation. And a week after that, Langston was spotted entering a Los Angeles courthouse and reportedly testified before the grand jury. But since then, for the most part, frankly, crickets in this case. No real developments, of course, until now. Joining us now to talk about this breaking news, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Big story out of Los Angeles tonight. Just what's your reaction? Because we have been covering this for so long about David's arrest.
Chris, my reaction is better late than never. I think this was something that we've all been expecting. When a body is found decomposing in the front of your Tesla, and there has been a young girl who's been missing for quite some time, and there's plenty of evidence that she ran away with you or a member of your entourage. I think there was a lot of evidence here pointing to David. And really the question was, what really took so long? And I think my initial reaction is, I live and work in LA. I respect law enforcement, that things can move slowly here. But I think this investigative grand jury, really is the answer. I think the DA wanted to lock in some members of David's inner circle to make sure that they cooperate, they don't go sideways at trial. And I think that's what they were waiting on before they ended up arresting.
So the announcement that came from the LAPD's TIO account says he's been arrested in connection to the murder of Celeste Rivas. And then it says that he's being held without bond. And then the case is going to be reviewed by the DA's office on Monday, or it goes in front of the DA's office on Monday. Like, if you can just walk us through the process of how that works, as opposed to them saying tonight, he has been charged with this and he's going to make his first appearance tomorrow.
Well, typically when you're talking about the DA, it's a reactive case. It's not like this. Law enforcement, they arrest someone, they prepare a report, that file lands on the DA's desk, and there's a charging DA that makes a decision. It's a little bit different in this case because it's more of a proactive investigation. Obviously, Celeste Rivas has been missing for quite some time and has been dead for also quite some time. So you have this case that has been worked on for more than 6 months now. I mean, I think, if I recall correctly, Celeste's body was found in September. We all saw the video of the car being impounded and that search. Then, of course, law enforcement executed search warrants at David's home. Again, months and months ago. So this is the type of case that isn't just a file that lands on some DA's desk. This is a case that is being directed by prosecutors at the district attorney's office. They convene this investigative grand jury. And we know that a grand jury has two functions. In most states and at the federal level, their function is to indict. But it also has an investigative function. They have subpoena power, so they can subpoena people, witnesses, they can subpoena information and documents. And that's what the grand jury was doing in this case. So it seems to me that the prosecution has this all buttoned up right now. This isn't the type of case they're reacting to. This is a case where they think we not only have enough probable cause to get that arrest warrant and get past a preliminary hearing, but we have enough to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury at trial.
Do you think that this came as a surprise to David tonight, this arrest?
I think given how long it's taken, maybe folks had forgotten about it, but obviously there's been a lot of attention on this case and frankly, a lot of negative media attention. Again, I sit here in LA and a lot of folks are asking, what is LAPD doing? How could a young girl be missing for so long? How could her teacher give an interview saying that she ran off with someone named David? How could her body be found in the trunk of a vehicle? I mean, even if it was an accident, that in and of itself is potentially a crime. So why haven't any arrests been made? And I think really now we're going to know the answer very soon. I think the information is going to come out. We're going to have a lot more of the evidence, whether it's witness testimony, cooperators, whether it's electronic evidence, cell phones, social media. There's a lot of people watching social media, sleuths, detectives. They've followed that digital footprint, right? And they've seen, pictures, images on social media of the two seemingly together. And I think all those are sort of bricks in the wall that are going to eventually be the reason that David is convicted in this case.
And beyond that too, I mean, I think when you think about the LAPD, like celebrities, it's not a big deal for them in the way that it might be for other police departments across the country. When you look at the timeline, the case certainly has these elements that we followed the developments along the way, but how much did the celebrity of David add to the timeline it took for him to be arrested in connection to this? And we'll see what they specifically accuse him of.
Well, it's interesting. The celebrity factor, people think it helps. I don't necessarily think it helps being a celebrity in LA. In fact, it draws more attention to it. I mean, obviously, look, the case I kind of give the example of recently, she was just sentenced, Matthew Perry, right? He was involved in a drug-related death. He was a victim. But the fact that, the ketamine queen, Jasmine Song, killing Matthew Perry, and again, I'm not naive, that case was treated differently than the 2019 case when she killed someone with ketamine. So, the celebrity factor draws attention to it. The reality is we're talking about the case here on Law and Crime because it's David. And, there are many young girls that go missing, and I'm not talking about it. I'm not asked to speak about it. And it doesn't make it any different. It doesn't make it any less right. There's women that are trafficked. They're sexually abused. They're victims of violence. They're even murdered, hundreds, thousands every single day. So I think the celebrity factor probably ended up drawing more attention to it, both law enforcement and prosecution attention to the case because of who David is.
Right. And even when you think of LA, I mean, we've talked about Nick Reiner recently, very different circumstances in that case. But I mean, just the amount of attention, the amount of cameras at court when he makes an appearance, it's just different than other families that have dealt with issues like that. When you look at this case going forward, I remember Neil Langston, one of David's friends, he gets arrested for not cooperating with this grand jury. What stands out to you just about the way, from at least on the outside, it seems that prosecutors have been going about this?
Yeah, think about that case. If I recall correctly, here's someone who refused to testify before the grand jury, and the DA's office went out of state to get an arrest warrant to bring him back to California. I mean, that's how seriously they're taking this case, if I recall correctly. So this isn't any other case. This isn't any other runaway. This isn't any other young girl who is the victim of violence. I mean, this case has been treated differently, as it should. Look, I wish LAPD had unlimited resources and time to go after all these cases, all these young girls. Their lives matter, and it's sad that this is unfortunately a tale that's all too common. Obviously, we don't know what happened here. We don't know if it was an accident. She was murdered intentionally. She overdosed. She was trafficked. I mean, there's all sorts of speculation out there. I don't know exactly what happened. But what we do know is this is a young girl that was missing for quite some time. She had run away at least once before, and it took a very long time to find her. So I think during that time period, there's going to be a lot of evidence. Obviously, we've seen some of the video evidence the last time she was seen. Again, I expect there to be a lot of digital evidence. It's going to be a strong case, I think, when it's all said and done.
And when it comes to just kind of how the mechanics of the whole situation works out. So if he's arrested tonight, he's being held without bond. He hasn't specifically been charged with anything. And then you have, on Monday, it's going to go in front of the DA. Like, how are you able to hold him for that long a period of time, even through the weekend potentially?
So yeah, these Thursday arrests oftentimes end up with a Monday arraignment because of the time period. Typically, you have about 48 hours to be brought before a judge, but it ends up being the next court day. So that's why the initial appearance will likely be on Monday, where David will be arraigned on the charges. Those charges will be read aloud in court. Expect his lawyer. I think he already has a lawyer based on some of the statements that were made last year. Expect his lawyer to enter a not guilty plea, and then the process starts. Again, if it's a grand jury indictment, which is not typical, there won't be a preliminary hearing. But usually here in LA, the district attorney proceeds by a complaint and a preliminary hearing. And again, just because there's a grand jury, I believe it's just an investigative grand jury. They'd have to convene another grand jury to indict. And I don't think that's what they're going to do. Typically what they do is, in LA, they charge on a complaint. Then after some period of time, there has to be a preliminary hearing. And at that preliminary hearing, the judge determines whether there's enough probable cause to move forward to a full-blown jury trial. So the DA will present some limited evidence, usually through a handful of law enforcement witnesses, and this process is going to get started.
And that was kind of my next question, because we don't know specifically the cause of death. At this point, we know the state at which her body was found, sadly, but then we also don't know what the charges specifically he's going to face. How much may we learn, knowing how much in LA and in California, when it comes to, I think of a state like Florida, and you can find the probable cause document online. How much might we learn on Monday if that's when he's arraigned on something?
Well, I think we're going to learn a lot. Obviously, the nature of the charges. So you have first-degree intentional murder, you have special circumstances, you have second-degree murder, you have manslaughter if it's an accident. Obviously, there might be charges related to moving the body. Are there going to be potential sex charges? I mean, I think that would be obviously very important. I mean, again, we're just guessing right now.
Sure.
There's no death penalty here in California. There's been a moratorium. We haven't had an execution in 20 years. So don't expect to see the death penalty regardless of what the charges are. But again, first degree intentional premeditated murder, special circumstances, if there's any type of enhancements, that's all going to be very telling. And look, it's just a matter of days before this evidence comes out.
And when you think about moving past Monday, and again, this has been a case that has developed, it feels like very slowly, and very much under wraps outside of the reporting that we've seen. Like after Monday, depending on what the charges are, like what does the timeline potentially look like for a prosecution of David?
Well, it's going to move quickly. And obviously, it's David's right to a speedy trial. And typically what you see is the defense waives their right. They want to get the discovery. They want to get all the evidence. So what is typical is the defendant will waive time. That means they'll review the discovery and they'll see how they can challenge this case. Now, if you're looking at murders, and again, I'm assuming this is a murder case because he's being held without bond. I mean, typically you have three types of defenses. One, it wasn't me, right? So you got finger pointing, was an accident, or I didn't intend to do it, right? So something happened that was something less than murder, or some sort of self-defense. Now, obviously, Celeste Rivas, by all accounts, is a pretty small young girl. I would be surprised if there's a self-defense argument, just like Nick Reiner, right? Surprised if you see self-defense in that type of case. His parents are a lot older, they're in their bedrooms. But typically, if you're seeing like what is the defense going to argue, they either argue identity, they argue intent. Wasn't premeditated, it was an accident, something along those lines. It was manslaughter, heat of passion, legal insanity. You start attacking intent, or you start putting up some legal defense like self-defense. But again, I would be very surprised if it were self-defense in this case.
And I know we were talking about Neil Langston just a short time ago, but you think about witnesses in this case and who may have already talked to law enforcement, what type of information that law enforcement may have. We don't know what those conversations were like, but what are those conversations typically like in a general sense as a prosecutor when you have someone who might be a friend of David, might be a friend of someone who's now going to face some pretty serious charges, about getting that person in line with what you want as a prosecutor?
Well, Chris, I sort of cut my teeth on drug trafficking cases, and when you're dealing with any criminal organization, and I'm not saying David's entourage is a criminal organization, but what you want to do is you want to lean on the less culpable people in the organization. Maybe someone was, for instance, giving Celeste Rivas drugs, maybe someone wasn't involved in the murder, but they had access to the Tesla. It seems like a lot of people did. What you want to do is lean on them and make sure they flip against the most culpable person in the organization. It's really prosecution 101. And what makes some of these charges strong, let's say you have a conspiracy charge, conspiracy to commit murder. You can really have nothing to do with actual murder, but if you're engaged in overt acts and furtherance of the conspiracy, and let's say it's some larger conspiracy, let's say it's a trafficking conspiracy, well, the next thing you know, you could be substantively on the hook for Celeste Rivas's death, even if you didn't actually kill her. So there's a lot of potential time that other individuals may be facing as co-conspirators, accessories, if they're aiding and abetting. And what you want to do is lean on them, make sure to get the information you want, make sure it's truthful, make sure they're going to cooperate. That's what that grand jury is for, testifying before the grand jury. Lock them in, so that way when you move forward against the principal, the person that you think is the most liable, the most culpable, seems like it's David here, that you have those witnesses locked in, because otherwise, guess what? They're going to be the next people to be charged and arrested.
And then just lastly, I mean, I'm sure for whether you're a detective on this case, you're a prosecutor who's been, kind of watching the evidence come in and you're thinking about what the charges could be. Emotionally, what is the moment like tonight, knowing that David is now in custody and you've hit a new level in this investigation in this case?
Yeah, certainly for law enforcement and the prosecution, I think there is going to be this burden lifted because, again, there have been folks like me. I've been very critical of law enforcement. I said, what's going on? This doesn't make any sense to me. Why hasn't an arrest been made? If it's not David, who is responsible for this? So I think there is that relief. But now the real work starts, because now you have a lawyer on the other side, and David has money and he's already lawyered up. At least that's my understanding. That's going to fight this tooth and nail. And because there's no death penalty in California, and because you're not going to give a discount on this case, you're not going to give David, if he really was involved in sort of recruiting or enticing this girl, potentially kidnapping her and killing her, are you going to give him anything less than life? So there's no real deal to be had here. There's no death penalty to take off the table. So this is the type of case that's very likely going to go all the way to jury trial. That's just the reality of it. So, but if you're talking about the people that I've been thinking of, it has to be Celeste Rivas's family. I can't imagine what they've been going through all these years. Your young girl goes missing and then she's found dead, and you really don't have answers. So hopefully the family can finally get some answers for everything that they've suffered through.
No, very well put. Former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Big breaking news tonight out of Los Angeles. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime.
Of course, Chris. Thanks for having me as always.
All right, just before we go, I just want to reiterate this news once again and what we know at this point. We know that David has been arrested in connection to the murder, and murder is the word that is being used here by the Los Angeles Police Department in connection to the murder of Celeste Rivas. And this is key, as he's being held without bond right now, we don't know what charges he's going to face, but this case will be presented to the district attorney's office in LA on Monday, and we'll continue to follow this closely. That will do it for this episode of On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify.